Today's speaker is Dr. Joseph Brownell. Now, normally he is known for one of his other topics, which is, chasing around Chester Gillette and Grace Brown and his work in the book The Adirondack Tragedy. But today he's going to talk to us about something a little different. So, Dr. Brownell.
I don't bounce as much as I used to, or as well. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
I've got things all over the place. I hope I find the right ones at the right time, but we'll make do with whatever I do. Fortunately, we've got them up on the screen, and there are only about 15 pictures along with this one. And because of the questions that have come up about this one, I think it's worth commenting upon. This is the ship. This is not the Lusitania, for example. The Lucy went down sometime before. But this one is a ship that was smaller, 13,000 tons, whereas the Lusitania may have been over 40,000. The one we remember most that hit the iceberg, she was about 45,000. So some of them were very big and lofty looking ships, and that's what the owners of this relatively small ship wanted to duplicate if they could. Well, not in reality. You can't change the size of the ship very easily, but when you do print pictures of the ship, you sort of like to emphasize the best things, maybe the biggest things. In this case, this is a painting, not a Technicolor photograph. And in it, you've got a very big funnel. You're still exaggerating steam because steam was the magic word when steamships came into being. And this is one with a big funnel. If you see the actual photographs of the ship, it's much smaller. But we have to live with that. It's reality. It also seems to be a rather tall ship going up in the air quite a ways. And for people who went on steamships to get across the Atlantic, you're stuck for about 7 or 8 days until the real fast ones came along. So you imagine the ship to be something, when you stand at the rail and pull away from the dock, big. And any contrast you can build into it is good. Good for your image, and your image is what you're building up here. And this one, reminds me of the Empress of Canada, which carried me from Montreal to Liverpool. 20,000 tons for the Empress. And she didn't start as an Empress. She started as something else in the system. Duchess of Richmond. But as soon as the passengers, middle-class passengers, as soon as the passengers began to wander the ship, sooner or later one of them is going to find the brass or bronze plaque, which was put in when the ship was built and had the original name. And in no time at all those middle-class passengers know the name of the ship as it originally was, the Duchess of Richmond. By about the second or third day out of Newfoundland, they were simply calling it the Drunken Duchess. She had a round bottom, and she rolled. From beam to beam, she rolled. And that's one of the things that you never forget. You can't forget it at the moment. Your stomach doesn't do much about it. You wonder why they use so much sawdust on these ships. Well, there's a reason. And during the night, they clean it up and take it away anyway. But next day, maybe again. Dining goes down for about 2 days, then it comes back slowly. So this is the ship that did North Atlantic, mostly between the northern English and Scottish and Irish ports, and Halifax in the wintertime, and Montreal in the summertime, Montreal. Never forget leaving Montreal. looking down off the rail, and everybody, all strangers, nobody knew each other at that time. But down at the foot of the staircase was a 3-member Wumpa band playing away for our benefit. And when we pulled away from the dock, the Wumpa band followed. They picked up their instruments and went right along to the end of the dock. You can't beat that for a show because you're part of it, just listening. So that was the sort of thing which took people away. Now, I'm going to be giving some impressions, but you must remember that this is 1939. On the 1st of September, Germany invaded Poland. On the 3rd of September, 3 days later, the British declared war on Germany because of it. And that left ships like this stranded in a way, because many of the big ships with the big names, like the Queen Mary, were quickly gobbled up by the government so they could be used for transport of military affairs and military equipment. They were faster than U-boats, but this one wasn't. And that played a role in it. I'm going to have to point out something that will become obvious in a minute. For me to play a part in this, it was as a schoolboy, 12 years old. How much do you remember at 12 years old? We all have to think about it, and I don't think I remember that much or that well. And in our family, every summer we went home to the farm down in Oswegatchie on Route 3. That's where the immigrants of the Irish end of the family started out in 1841. My mother insisted on going back to the farm. This was her only respite from urbanism. I mean, the urbanism she's talking about was little hamlets. Little Oswegatchie was no big raging urban place. But we lived with that anyway. And I lived with it as a 12-year-old. Because the act of being in the Depression in the 30s, in the Great Depression, the 12-year-olds knew about it. The students knew about it. We as children knew about it. Our parents didn't raise Cain and make a huge sermon out of the whole thing at all. We simply heard them mentioning things like, well, we can't have that this year, maybe we can afford it next year. I think that was a common thing to hear. And it was intended not to set us into alarm. But we knew they were short on money. We knew something about what they had to pay for certain things, certainly groceries. My father would make sure in the wintertime, and he was an engineer who didn't always have a job, that in the wintertime when he did have a job, he would have gone out ahead of time during the summer months and rented a furnished house. This is what my mother wanted. I'm not sure my father cared, but he'd get it for her and stay in places like Gabriel's, New York, Port Byron, Babylon, Long Island. Strange combinations of places depending on who was building what and where and when. I learned very early on that one of the things that happened is that this changed every summer. My father would go out during the summer and find the house to rent and rent it, and we'd be committed to live there for the next 10 months. So we're kind of stuck with that, and as a 12-year-old boy, by the time I got to being 12, I wasn't all that much fun about talking about it, probably, because I knew that there was a lot of repetition, and the repetition wasn't always fun repetition. In June, in the schools, they all went through with a big heaving sigh of relief, I think. There's things with students saying, "See you in September, have a wonderful summer." Yeah, I've yawned. I wasn't going to have a wonderful summer because of that. I had to chase the cows and collect berries, and that's what went on the farm. When they said, you're going to have a certain room, a certain teacher, and when you come back in September. Well, there, I wasn't going to be around. I knew the routine. I'd wait and see what my father had set up. So that was the way things had been in the early 30s and the mid-30s. But toward the end of the 30s, things were changing as the wartime mood improved in Europe, if you can call it improvement. They were purchasing more war material in Canada and the United States to be shipped across on the ocean. That's when some of these ships began to use their masts. That one's got a lookout spot on it, this one doesn't. These were primarily for not cargo, but for individuals, people. And in this picture that I'm setting up, my father had made one change in the 1938 year, or in Gabriel's, 1938, 1939, we were in a condition where my father, either because he had to or because he wanted to, took a longer trip to get to work. I think he went 13 miles or something like that, all the way in from Barnum Pond all the way into Saranac Lake. I loved it. Saranac Lake was a great place. We can go a couple, when we get that one for the school. There it is. I loved that school from the moment I first saw it. It looked like a school, or it looked like what somebody thought a school ought to look like. And this end was a wing that was the gym, and that end was a wing which was the auditorium. The main front door went straight to the offices, and students didn't use it very often. They weren't encouraged to use it. But come 1939, something was changing. And that was that when my father came back, probably May of 39, he let me know that we weren't going to move this year. We're going to come back to the same place. Same landlord right next door. We bought 2 houses just to get a bigger house, but nothing more than that. You mean I'm coming back to Saranac Lake? Yes, I think my father knew what was going on inside. Saranac Lake was a nice village. Even my mother didn't complain too much about it. She didn't like walking salesmen coming to the door, but that's understandable. So I was excited coming to Saranac Lake that year. And there was a small side story to this I have to drop on you, and then you can leave it and run. My mother never quite got enough summer vacation on the old farm. So she figured out a way, knowing that I transferred in schools very readily, to keep me in the little one-room school for a couple of extra weeks. Then mid-September, then go to the new place. It was a bit of an imposition upon me, but I didn't mind. I didn't mind traveling. I knew the business of transfer. So I did my thing, and we went to Saranac Lake, not knowing what is going on across the ocean at about the same time. And so it's already set that we got there, and I got up in the morning. I ran to school. It's only a mile. I ran to school and went right to the main office, because these are the administrative offices right in here. Boy, was I ready. I did my transfer work to almost telling the clerk how to do it, because I knew the form, she didn't. And she said, you go but I was gone. Take a right turn right here and go back into the principal corridor, which goes left and right. Make a left turn, because I knew where Miss Kelly's room was, because she was the one that we were told was going to be the homeroom teacher. That set of windows right there. So I had to make a left turn in the main corridor and run down there and run. I suddenly found that I had frozen into the pavement, the floor. I was looking ahead and the students from behind were bumping me for my sudden stop. That teacher up ahead guarding the door of her homeroom was not her. I don't know who was. Compared to her, we can get another, so we can fish out the picture of Miss Kelly and her brother. Right there. The one thing I could come up with in the memory the other day was height. She was short. There's no question about it. Didn't bother us any. But this woman at the door was about, I say 8 feet tall, but a lot of that is not 8 feet tall, and it's not basketball. It's just taller than she was. And I didn't know what to say or do. I still had the flimsy for the transfer in my hand, and she grabbed it and swept it out of my hand and said, "Go take any place that nobody is sitting at." So I did. But on the way into the room, I spotted Hank Hamburger over at the windows, and I went to him, the boy from across the street. "Hank, where is Miss Kelly?" He gave me that swooping look of, "Don't you people ever read the newspapers?" "Why? You just come from Oswegatchie?" "Yes." "Well, I thought they read the papers in Oswegatchie and they know about the conditions here." "What conditions?" And then I got the story of how Miss Kelly and her older sister had gone on a tour trip of northern England and Scotland and probably Northern Ireland, because the father came from Londonderry. So they went on a trip. Don't you listen to the radio either and the news? And then he told me about what had happened on the ship. Those two girls, well, they were 30 anyway. One was even 33, I think. Those two women bought tickets on this ship to go across the Atlantic to places like Halifax, Quebec, Montreal. Because they're New Yorkers, they know the routes of getting up to Montreal and making your change there. I did it. Other people have done it. But we weren't ready for that as students to listen. Most of the students didn't care that much. But what had happened is that these people were on board this ship, overloading it, by the way. They had to snap together some spare lumber and make berths for the overload. The ship went down, took all night to sink. It was probably a good idea, because if it had gone down in 10 minutes, they would have lost over 1,000 people. They had 1,400 sailing on board as passengers and crew. And of them all, most of them got out. I think the total loss was about 138, which is not too bad. Most of that occurred in the water because they had lifeboats backing up behind destroyers and merchant ships, which the destroyer captains and the merchant ship captains didn't know about. So if you back up your ship and chew up the lifeboat, you're going to do some tremendous damage. Anyhow, they were by this time, and I just paused to say that it had begun between, when we see a room coming up in a minute, it'll be the dining room for tourist class. And people in that came at 7 o'clock, the first sitting. By 7:15, the torpedo hit. By 7:30, they were all scampering up the stairs. there's the stairs. And the rest is a stock photo they probably have used for years of what the tourist room looks like. But all of a sudden, in an instant almost, everything changed. Torpedo hit between bulkheads, I've forgotten which sections. And why shoot a torpedo in peacetime? You have to read the reasons given by the commander of the U-30, which shot the torpedoes. It doesn't make a great deal of sense, but then Hitler never made a great deal of sense. And he never punished this guy either. So make your own judgments a little bit about people in power in that place at that time. I have to pause for 1 minute and ask for the time.
12:30.
Half past. 12:30.
12:30, okay, we're pretty much on track.
The Lusitania was before or after this?
Well, going up, and by the way, I must point out my hearing is terrible.
The Lusitania was sunk before or after this?
Yeah, and the one we think of with the iceberg is which one?
Titanic.
Titanic. She had a sister ship who sailed after she did as a hospital ship, and she got hit by a mine or something, went down in I think less than a half an hour. So some of them can be pretty rugged in terms of reliability of what you think is going to be automatic. Lifeboats don't run themselves. They have to be championed or led by a sailor who's done this before. Now, where is he when everything is falling down around you? Usually not visible because he's tied up with something else. Anyhow, people went into the water mostly in an organized fashion. The pictures, and I think we may have a picture of the loading of one of the ships coming up to the city of Flint, which is the name of a ship that was take them on. They had oars, but didn't necessarily know how to use them. They'd never had any practice at this. And the petty officers who may be in places like this down here with an officer's type cap, they could help, they could instruct, but this is bedlam going on, and you can almost see it tearing yours and everybody else's hair out. Oars. I don't want to be part of it. But two freighters, one yacht owned by a Swede, but it had been previously owned by an American millionaire, and 3 Royal Navy destroyers all appeared on the scene and started trying to help. The trouble is they'd never done a coordinated thing before, so they got in each other's way without even knowing it. And when they backed up and chewed up the wooden bolts of their screws, that was when you knew something was terrible. The man in the middle is a scalding victim. He was standing near a pipe full of steam when the thing hit. He survived, I don't know how well from that point of view, but at least they got a start. This is probably taken in Ireland because a lot of the ships that wanted to take the passengers ashore as fast as possible, especially if they needed medical help, could be seen like this guy right here in military cap and chin strap, which I think is Irish Army, possibly 1st Division, 1st Unit, meaning they're Irish speakers. Another one, please. I think this was taken on a ship afterwards as they were going from one port to another. These were called the Texas girls. They're from down in Texas, and they're probably all college co-eds. And they look happy enough, but I think they look, the ones in the three of them, as if they're maybe wearing borrowed coats or gift coats. It's hard to tell because people were short on coats almost immediately. Because that's the last thing you take to a dining room, for example, in the summertime. Don't judge by that. She's wearing, never mind that. There's one of the British destroyers. Probably the Electra, which is the one that did most of the actual fishing out and taking them to Scotland. One of them was strictly doing radar and sonar searches. The other two were whatever the demand was at the time. So you never know exactly which ship is being shown, where the three girls, for example, are. You can see the railing behind them, but you don't know where it is or when. There's no telltale time, no telltale place. But they're happy, and they're happy just to be alive. Next, please. Who would do such a thing as this? You want his picture? Have his picture. Fitzjulius Lemp. I guess the name got washed out here, but L-E-M-P is the name. His actual title at that time was Captain Lieutenant Lemp. Captain to be in the ship, the U-30. His actual rank was a lieutenant, Oberleutnant. So that gets him down where you could draw a parallel if you wanted to with John F. Kennedy and his PBT boat during World War II. Kennedy was captain of the boat, but he was only, I think, in JG at the time. You get variations of stories. He tells us that when he raised this is the third day of the war, the day when the declaration of war went to Germany at 11 o'clock in the morning, maybe 11:15. And here he takes a firing shot at it at 7 o'clock at night. He claimed that, one, the ship was blacked out. Take your beneficial chances and hope that nothing goes wrong. Maybe you shouldn't black out. How do you do the right thing? How do you know what the right thing is? And said, and his defenders have never contested it, that of the people on board, there were about 1,400, all told, ship's crew, passengers. About 3/4 of them were women or children. Next, please. This made the newspapers. Boy, did it make the newspapers. Halifax, London, New York, Montreal, all over the place. They got headlines. Didn't bother Hitler too much. But then I don't think anything bothered Hitler too much. Not conscious driven. One more. There was a lot of talk in the American section. Remember, there was no television at that time. There was something in New York City, but not for the rest of the country. And not very much in New York City. But we had newspapers, and we had radio service. Everybody listened for the 7 o'clock news at night, or sometimes the 6:45 news. That's where the peachy stories were. We still wait for them at 6:30 and see what the heck went on today that they can polish up. Sometimes they have to polish a little more because there isn't that much of a real story. But that's part of the thing newsmen have to face every day. From the Secretary of State's office in Washington, he was an old man even then. I better be careful how I say that. I have slight traces of gray in my hair and what's left, I mean. Secretary of State would send questions to the Secretary of his ambassador in London. What's going on in the British Isles and what are we doing about it? Can we depend again on the Royal Navy to be there? And such questions, one after the other. Well, the secretary, the ambassador in London was not a particularly well-informed person, probably. Maybe I should say not particularly interested. His name was Kennedy, Joe Kennedy. And he, if anything, as time went on, he began to think that Great Britain was wrong and Germany was the stronger country anyway. And for that, I think they pulled him rather quickly without much comment. Normally, when you have something in publicity like this, with lots of photographs in the newspapers, you want to make sure that the people back home are aware that you're checking. And how do you check? Well, you send people up there. For example, the older man on the left is the Lord Mayor of London, the Lord Mayor of Glasgow, up in Scotland. And he is going out with the ambassador's son, which is a typical family type arrangement. So you'll probably recognize the man on the left side of the picture. I'm sorry, the man on the right as we look at the picture.
That's Kennedy?
That's Kennedy.
Yeah.
The question is, which Kennedy? JFK.
Oh, it is. Oh.
He got into it early. But he looks young, he looks like a university graduate, which is just about what he was that year. I think the only thing that left was he had to write something that could be published. And what he did publish wasn't very helpful to Roosevelt. So Joe Kennedy lost his job and things started to go on forever. One thing that just didn't get out of hand was what happened to the ship. One more, I think we had. Oh, a couple more. I had a note, just go back to where we were, where they're working with the box or boxes. It's not clear the nature of the thing. There's a man in shirt, suit, tie, and a hat in his hand on the left. Middle-aged man at least.
Joseph Kennedy.
That's Joe Kennedy.
Pardon?
That Joe Kennedy. On the left.
I don't know. I don't think so.
Looks like him.
Does look like him, especially the glasses.
Yeah, he didn't look like it.
But this probably is what we call an undertaker from one of the Scottish ports visiting the ship. And there are at least two guys, these two on the right, who aren't totally up in shirt, tie, and spiffy dress. They may be members of the crew, they may be officers who have grabbed a coat somewhere, and they're getting ready to take a body and get it back to Canada. Little girl, 10 years old. Canada didn't take a great deal of persuasion from that point on. Canadians were angry, and for good reason. You don't see 10-year-olds going down the drain for no good reason. Next picture, I think we'll try it again. Back in Saranac Lake. I never left town. Unless we took an overnight to Ostrogacci, and that's not worth writing up. But I'm back to the school that I thought very highly of. I at one time tried to write this up in third person and discovered that for someone who doesn't usually write his own biographical data in third, first is much more common, and we do it all the time. I do this, I do that, I would do such and such. But there we are, and if I could, now I was back where I was hoped to be. It took about 4 weeks for the thing to clear. I think it got into New York Harbor on the 27th of September. Then things could slip back into motion, bit by bit. This is still Miss Kelly's room here. And right around the corner is the auditorium with the high windows. I mention it only because it's the only other thing that I would remember so well about this building had to do with the auditorium. 2 things. One I'd rather forget, but it worked. The music teacher knew a good gag when she saw it. She gave me a little globe about 6 inches in diameter and said, during a stage moment, on one of those awful terminals things on Friday morning, said, you go out and just hold it up and say, I went out, held it up and said, I am Hercules. Brought down the house. But I never stopped hearing about it for the rest of the year and sometimes into the following year. The other thing is more serious. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor was attacked. On December 8th, the President asked for and got a joint session of Congress he could address. Everybody knew what it would be. He wanted a declaration of war against Japan. We were told, as students on the loudspeaker system, that we could go to the auditorium and take a seat because they had it wired so that speakers would carry the radio broadcast. I don't know how many went, but I know I did. And every time I see a tape of the President speaking, the date which will live in infamy, I see it from that seat. That's pretty much the end. The next thing in the line got in by me. Oh no, one last mention. Our math teacher kept us at it. And we kept going and going and going right into January, when we had to take Regents exams at an 8th grade level, which was relatively new, I think, at the time, for external exams to come in, made up in Albany. And we apparently did rather well. We got eight of us got perfect papers. I'm head of the list only because of alphabet. I don't remember the exam or whether it was hard, easy, or what, but it was kind of fun. And it's kind of fun to, who would do this? My mother must have been the one who clipped the clipping out. Probably the Watertown Times, but I don't know for sure. And then put it in a scrapbook, and I didn't find it for a number of years. There is a mistake in it. They call her Mrs. Mary Louise Kelly. The 3 girls, never married, never had children, of the Kellys. So,
But survived that ship.
she got back, and so did her sister, but she wrote memos which have been picked up. And for anybody who wants to see somewhere, or give us a gift, something that is interesting, this book here, The Athenia Torpedoed, is done by a man in Manitoba, It's like saying, here's something in Chicago. Central Canada, right in the middle of the country. It's interesting to me solely because there's a picture of him just inside the cover flap. He's got white hair. Imagine having white hair. I guess I'll have to live with that anyway. But he is living in a building I was in one summer myself when I was teaching summer out there. And that's one of the things I'm so glad I ever did, was teach in the prairie provinces 4 different years. I didn't care that much for Alberta. But Winnipeg is a nice old city. And everybody, when you say old city, you mean it. Thank you for being a very polite and very tolerant audience. The one guy down that list, Harold Kern. The first year I was in that place, I was in a little room where it was the home room for 7th graders. That was me. And I came in with my little brown bag. And the teacher looked at everything, but her eye caught that bag really fast. And I think what she had in mind was peanut butter and other things like that in the warm room. It gets out. And so she called Carl Kern, who teamed with me in this other thing next year. And he took me down to the cafeteria, not to eat, but where underneath the big metal counter was a place with all those brown bags. And that's where you put your brown bag. Work on your memories when you're 12 years old. Think of the funny things you can think of. And thank you very much.